Magic was born in 1993, and along with it, so was every deck that would ever exist. Blue-white control, mono-black discard, red aggro, white aggro, mid-range, decks where your creature type matters, land matters, enchantments matter, ramp, combo, burn, mill, reanimator, life gain, no matter what your favorite deck is, it was present at the dawn of the game, and for 2 decades, it would stay that way. So it was strange and exciting when Tom Martell found his way to the finals of Pro Tour Gatecrash with a deck that wasn't quite like any deck we'd seen before. Designed by Sam Black, it was called the Aristocrats, named for 2 cards, Cartel Aristocrat and Falconwrath Aristocrat. The deck had a lot of small creatures like Doom Traveler, as well as token effects like Lingering Souls to feed the larger of the 2 aristocrats. Just cut down the opponent's life total quickly, but Falconwrath could often carry entire games by itself by being nearly impossible to get rid of, and growing steadily larger as the game went on. But the real key to the deck was that the majority of its tricks were deployable mid-combat. And with a deck like this being so new and so different, it was easy to miss which of those tricks the opponent had access to, or do your math wrong with so many potential triggers to keep track of. Aristocrats had been a dark horse in this tournament, but now it was sitting across from Joel Larson, one of the best players in the world, at the very top of the Pro Tour mountain. Luckily for it was piloted by Tom Martell, who was also one of the best Magic players in the world. By Game 3, things were looking bleak. Tom had dropped Game 1, which the commentary team had stated multiple times was a very important game for him to pick up in the match. After winning Game 2 on the back of the amazing Obsidian Ghost Council, Tom again found himself on the back foot in Game 3. At one point, he got all the way down to 3 life, with Joel and his Jeskai midrange deck at a full 17, and he was facing down a Thundermaw Hellkite, a 5-mana 5/5 flyer that may not look like a serious card by today's standards, but back then...
Yeah, it's a serious card.
On his turn, Tom attacks for 7 with a Falconwrath Aristocrat and a Boros Reckoner, and then says go. Joel attacks with a Thundermaw and a 1/3 Augur of Bolas, at which point Tom sacks his Doom Traveler to the Falconwrath to create a spirit that can block the Hellkite, then chumps the Augur of Bolas with his Champion of the Parish, making sure to sack his creatures to the Falconwrath after doing so. On his turn, Tom swings with the boys, uses Orzhov Charm to bring Doom Traveler back, sacks it and the token it creates to the Aristocrat, bringing the total damage to exactly lethal against Larson. In the next game, Larson would end up flooding out while Tom rode yet another Aristocrat to victory to take the crown at Pro Tour Gatecrash 2013.
Right now, he is on the brink of a Pro Tour title with the Aristocrats. Here's another Aristocrat. Joel nods. In they come, and Tom Martell of the United States is your Pro Tour Gatecrash champion for 2013. He got the job done, and it was the Aristocrats.
In the years since, Aristocrats has become a beloved deck archetype with a sadly sparse competitive record. It would live on again for a bit in 2015 with the Rally the Ancestors deck, but in the near decade since, Aristocrats has largely been relegated to the Commander environment. That said, there are still plenty who believe that Aristocrats will see its day in the sun again, because it has an appeal that no other deck has. A tricky blend of properties, best summed up by Brian Bronduin just after the deck's Pro Tour victory.
You know, people dismiss, I mean, obviously this is a very complicated aggro deck with a lot of things that, as we said, we don't even know all the things this deck does, but a lot of people will dismiss a deck full of small creatures as like a kitty deck. But you see how many decisions and all the implications that were in play at every turn.
So is now the time for the unassuming small creature deck to rise again? Let's take a look at Orzhov Aristocrats. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. What up, Wizards? It's Dev, SPMTG. We like it at Magic, especially on days like this, because I get to talk about the Aristocrats, which I never get to do. I never talk about the Aristocrats, not to be confused, by the way, with the 1970s Disney vehicle, the Aristocats. Although, things are probably going to get about as messy as that movie's animation, because we got a new blood artist in MTG Foundations. By the way, not to throw any shade on the Aristocats, like, it's a fine movie. I like the geese, but you know what I like even more is the Aristocrats. The joke. It's a funny joke when you do it right, but even more than that, I like the Aristocrats, the Magic deck. And this card right here, it's been on your screen long enough while I've been being a lunatic. You probably had enough time to read it by now. This little blood artist variant over here, this little cutie pie, what he does that's different from the other blood artists we have in Standard, because we have other blood artists in Standard. It wasn't like we're just like waiting on one blood artist to drop so we could make Aristocrats again. We've actually had him in Standard for a minute, but like, first of all, this guy's not legendary like the other ones are. which is awesome to be able to have multiple copies out at the same time. But also, he triggers when he dies, which is not something that the other Blood Artists in Standard do, and actually matters an awful lot. Now, just like I had to do with the Aristocrats a second ago, I feel like I should point out that I'm not like throwing any shade on the Blood Artists that we do have in Standard, because we're also playing like 3 LSO Core in this deck. We're playing 2 Vron Executioner Thane. I think that's his full name post comma. I'm fairly certain. But yeah, these guys are also in the deck. Am I covering up my head yet with the amount of cards I have to put on screen? It doesn't matter. But one way or the other, yeah, we're playing like all these cards. So we have a total of what is that, like 9 Blood Artists in this deck. One of them, Vron, triggers only once a turn, but at least it does double damage, gains us double life. LSO Core is, you know, it's kind of a Soul Warden, but it's also a Blood Artist. It cares when stuff other than it dies. And Vengeful Blood Witch is just the absolute best out of all of these. Sorry, LSO Core. Yes, she is my wife. Yes, we are getting married. At this point, actually, we did get married. We did a whole like $1 million video about it, but it turns out I left the lens cap on the camera, so kind of took a bath on that one. But yeah, we are, Ellis and I are, in fact, married now. It turns out I don't do the dishes enough, and she doesn't walk the dog, so the sink full of dishes, and there's like dog poop in the house. But honestly, other than that, it's a good marriage. We love each other. Things are fine. But despite a veritable Comic-Con artist's alley worth of Blood Artists here, we actually have to play like other kinds of creatures in our Aristocrats deck. First and foremost, we got to find something to sack creatures to so that they will die. This is a complex Rube Goldberg machine. We have to have multiple components too, and this is just another one. So we're going to end up playing 3 copies of Bartolomeo Presidio. Don't try to do that. Do not try to do that. Bart. Just call him Bart. It's fine. It's just 2 mana for a thing that lets us at free and repeatable speeds just let us sack guys. You know, it's broken, right? I guess they don't realize how broken that is. But yeah, just for 2 mana, we get to sack anything we want, anytime we want for absolutely free and make Bart a little bit larger, which is kind of amazing because it's not too hard to get him to like 5 power very fast. But 3 things is not enough things to sack stuff to. So I'm also playing 3 copies of Braid's Arisen Nightmare in the deck, which is just about as high as the curve goes in the deck. There's like 2 copies of 4-drop we'll get to a little bit later. It's kind of important, but Braid's is also kind of pretty important. It's one of the better cards in our entire deck. It gives us a sacrifice outlet, and even though it's only once per turn, it also has a habit of drawing cards and dealing a lot of damage to the opponent too, depending on what we sacrifice. Pro tip, don't forget you can sack lands to it, because again, our curve is super low. Once you get to 3-4 mana, you're kind of done needing mana, whereas your opponent probably wants to have more than that. So if you sack a land, that turns out to be one of the best ways to make sure you draw the card and they lose the life. Just remember, your lands are expendable. They're a resource, but there's all kinds of stuff in this deck you can sack. You know, there's artifacts you can sack in this deck, so don't worry, it's pretty easy to find a way to get some life off your opponent and some fresh cards in your hand with the Braids. But I'm also on 4 copies of Midnight Reaper. This is a brand new old card. We haven't had in Standard since like Guilds of Ravnica. It's been a while since we've had the Reaper in Standard. Not only is this one of the coolest Magic cards ever printed, he's a Grim Reaper on a black horse who draws cards when your guys die. It's awesome. But he too, just like Vengeful Blood Witch, he cares when he dies. So he'll draw you a card if your opponent cuts him down. And it turns out it's going to happen a lot, because if 3 drops it dies to cut down. And that kind of sucks because you'd lose on mana value, but at least you draw a card, which is nice. But you see, this is just another piece of the machine, right? Like, we've got a Vengeful Blood Witch and maybe an LSO Core out. We got a Bartolomeo, we got a Midnight Reaper, and maybe a couple little small dudes. Well, now, when we sacrifice a creature to Bartolomeo, we'll draw a card off the Midnight Reaper. We'll deal some pings with the LSO Core, the Vengeful Blood Witch. We're really getting it done here. But we need little guys to say we can't just sacrifice Vengeful Blood Witches and Ellis's and stuff. We need those. So let's figure that part out. We got to play a bunch of little men in this deck. Well, they can be women, I guess, but I think I'm pretty sure they're all dudes. Either way, we're playing 4 copies of Kitesail Freebooter. It's not Kitesail Freebooter, it's Greedy Freebooter. I literally always do that. We're playing 4 Greedy Freebooter in this deck to start off the 1-drops. Now, I'm pretty sure this is like the best creature in Standard to sacrifice. There's a few that are pretty good. You know, we got access to like Market Gnome. I guess it's fine in this deck. If we wanted to play red, black, white, which we probably should. We got like Clockwork Percussionist. Like, they're good 1-drops to sacrifice in Standard. But as far as Freebooter goes, getting a treasure token is actually kind of amazing a lot of the time. The deck could stand to ramp every now and again. It's not that it wants to play a 4-drop ahead of schedule, but it does want to spend 4 mana ahead of schedule like, all day. So sometimes that's good enough for it. But just having a little dude that helps like fix its next draw works really well with Midnight Reaper because, you know, sacrifice it to something or it dies in combat. Scry 1 first, put the card on top or bottom, and then draw your card off Midnight Reaper. That always feels really good too. So Freebooter is just kind of a dream 1-drop for this deck, but so is Infestation Sage. This is just Doom Traveler. You remember Doom Traveler from the beginning of the video? I was showing you the footage. See, this is just... it's just Doom Traveler. That's 27 creatures in the main deck. And to be honest, I'd like to play anywhere between 1 and 3 more creatures, but we do have to make room for some spells in the deck. Now, first of all, I'm playing 4 copies of Get Lost in here, but if you want to keep the deck under like $50, which I think is a pretty good price, you could just throw in Go for the Throat here, which you can get for as little as 60 cents from Foundation's Jumpstart. I think is like the cheapest way to get a copy of Go for the Throat. But if you want to juice the deck as much as possible, then I think you should probably just spring for the Get Lost, which are about $6 a piece now. But the ability to get rid of, you know, enchantments and not just creatures, planeswalkers and not just creatures, is a pretty big upgrade on a card like Go for the Throat. But that said, Go for the Throat's way cheaper and it doesn't leave map tokens behind. I guess that's sick. So you make the call however you want to do it. But if you include the Get Lost, I think the deck is something like $70, 75. But if you do the Go for the Throats, then it can go under $50 really, really easily. So again, leave the call up to you. They're both really good pieces of removal. But I've also got 4 copies of Annihilating Glare in this deck. Now, you could play like Final Vengeance or something if you felt like it instead, but we don't really have a whole lot of enchantments to sacrifice in this deck. So I'm going with Glare, and the ability to just pay extra mana and not have to sack a guy has actually been like a really valuable mode on the card a bunch of times during playtesting. But for the most part, it's just 1 mana, sack my Infestation Sage, get a 1/1 flyer, and take that the best thing on your side of the table. Like, Annihilating Glare is just such a ridiculous Magic card in this deck and not a whole lot of other decks. But the final non-land in the main deck, we have saved room for 2 copies of Raise the Past. Now, altogether with the Blood Artisty type effects and with this card now, this deck is a lot more reminiscent of the 2015-2016, you know, Rally the Ancestors plus Zulaport Cutthroat, Midnight Reaper, you know, that kind of deck, than it is like the Pro Tour Gate Crash winning deck. If we had wanted to recreate that deck, I think we have the tools in Standard. You know, Immisturm Predator is kind of like a Falcon Wrath Aristocrat. There's that Screaming Nemesis is kind of like Ouroboros Reckoner, like a little bit, right? So, you know, if we wanted to rebuild that deck, I think we could have, but I have gone with the deck that's a little bit more near and dear to my heart, and that's that Rally the Ancestors piece, that beautiful deck from the mid-2010s, right? That happened around the same time I started the channel, so of course I've got some special love for it. That deck, of course, played Rally the Ancestors to get all of its dudes out of the graveyard, even if just for 1 turn, so you could then sack them again and get all your Zulaport Cutthroat triggers and stuff. Just put the game out of reach that way. Now, when it comes to Raise the Past, you're doing something really, really similar. This won't get Braids or Midnight Reapers back from your yard, which sometimes sucks, but it will get back more or less all of your other relevant guys, right? Your Vengeful Blood Witches, your Elisol Core, your Bartolomeo Presidio, and put them all in play at the same time, along with your Greedy Freebooters and your Infestation Sages. Now, it doesn't seem like it's going to work that way all the time, and to be honest with you, it doesn't work that way all the time, but it does enough of the time. 60% of the time, it works every time, I should say, you know, like in this game against Blue-Black Control, you can tell they've got a couple of Nowhere to Runs in play. They've resolved a Deadly Cover-Up as well, so they've just been keeping us off the board more or less all of the game here, but 1 Raise the Past, and look at how the board explodes into population, and we're able to do something kind of cute here where we can put the game away by using an Annihilating Glare and sack one of our own creatures to target one of our own creatures with the glare and kill our opponent. It's a fun time. Now let's take a look at the lands real quick. There's only 23 of them. Seems a little bit light, but again, our curve is kind of low in this deck. We can manage it, and we still end up with 18 black sources and 15 white sources. Plenty of both. But one thing I feel like I gotta point out about this mana base that makes me love it is how cheap it is. This is the first time in a while that I've wanted a deck to be budget, and I haven't felt the need to just stuff it full of nothing but basic lands, you know? Like, right now, Caves of Koilos is between 35 and 50 cents. Restless Fortress is 50 cents. Even Concealed Courtyard is like less than $2 right now, so really cheap to make this deck budget and even play dual lands in it, which is kind of amazing. If you wanted to bring up the cost a little bit more, just like we were talking about with Get Lost back there, you can play Go for the Throat instead. If you wanted to add money to this deck and make it a little bit better, I think, you could probably take out one of the basic lands and throw in a Fountain Port, which is really good with all of your like Blood Artistry effects, but that card's like $10. So you don't need it, but it would be nice to have it from time to time, right? But apart from that, last thing I want to say with the mana base here is that Restless Fortress may look a little risky considering we've got all these 1-drops in the deck and it comes into play tapped, but you're going to be really happy when you're staring across the table at an Atraxa and a Valgavoth and you can get in for the win like we do right here. How amazing is that? But let's run quickly through the sideboard here because honestly, it's pretty simple and surprisingly effective, man. We're running 4 copies of Stab in the deck. Again, I wanted to keep things relatively budget, so I'm not running Cut Down, which is for some reason a $5 card. Stop. We've also got Cathar Commando as a full 4 of in this deck. A lot of these white-based decks will play like Exercise or Lorn of the Third Path or something in this slot, but I really like Cathar here. Sacrifices itself, right? You go ahead and get that trigger off of Elisil Core or Vengeful Blood Witch or whatever, and just basically a great disenchant effect for a deck like this. Can even get some damage in or block when you need it to. Just pretty slick card. But keeping up with the theme of like wanting creatures in our creature-based deck, so you know we don't want to side out a bunch of creatures in our creature-based deck and throw in a bunch of spells. Those aren't creatures. So with that in mind, let's throw in 4 Sun-Blessed Healer here. So kind of a mini Raise the Past in a way. For 4 mana, the same cost, is only going to get 1 guy back, but you know, Raise the Past is not a 3/1 lifelinker in and of itself that can also be sacrificed. You know, whereas Sunblessed Healer is, if we're up against decks with a lot of removal, and you will be, you know, it's one of the most annoying things about trying to play Elisil Core of the last couple of years here is that she dies to every piece of removal, and in the current environment where everyone's game planning for mono red and Llanowar Elves on turn 1 and stuff, like, you can bet that your Ellis is probably going to die a bunch of times. Your Vengeful Blood Witch is probably going to die a bunch of times. Be ready for decks like that with 4 full copies of Healer here. It's a really slick card, but there's also 2 copies of Lord Skitter Sewer King. This achieves a couple of things. It's actually a pretty good thing against, I keep saying thing, against the like graveyard-based decks right now. So Oculus it's okay against, but Rite of the Moth and Zombify lists that we're kind of seeing pick up some steam, especially Zombify lists in the early season, this can be an amazing card against, just denying them one of the best things they could reanimate every turn, and more importantly in some ways, putting tokens on our side of the table that'll give us triggers and whatnot when they die, or come into play in the case of Elisil Core. So you're always going to want more fodder, more dudes in your Aristocrats deck, and Lord Skitter gives you those too. But apart from that, the last card on the board is just a catch-all Legions to Ashes, which can blow up everything from Urbrass Forge to Caretaker's Talent to like really nasty 6 and 7 mana creatures and enchantments, and Planeswalkers always carry one of these. But before we get to the example game, let's take a quick look at our power rankings. I know you love them so much. Boy, that's a lot of 6s and 7s. The thing about an Aristocrats deck, and a good Aristocrats deck especially, is that there's not a whole lot besides synergy, and it does, that stands out in an Aristocrats deck, but there's not a whole lot that the deck does poorly either. It's just like Brian Braunduin said, it just looks like a bunch of dinky little creatures. It looks like a kitty deck, but there's a lot of decisions being made here. There's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're the opponent swinging into it, math you have to do, that you may not even realize you have to do at first. And even when it's behind, sometimes it can dig its way out of situations, give it enough turns, and it buys itself those turns. For instance, let's take a look at our example game this week, where not only do we dig ourselves out of a bad situation, we then get back into a bad situation that we can save ourselves from in the end. Now we're joining this game already in progress against Boros Aggro. We're resolving a Bartolome del Presidio and getting in with our greedy freebooter. Opponent has a Warden of the Inner Sky and a Novice Inspector over there, so they're looking pretty good. They try to resolve a Case of the Gateway against our Bart, but that's their first mistake. We're able to sacrifice the greedy freebooter and the treasure token it leaves behind to get the Bart just big enough to not die to the Case. Now, they're still going to come in for damage, and we're still going to give it to them. It's not a big deal, just 3, we go to 17. On our turn, we can resolve Elisil Core and Infestation Sage, so we're shelling up real nice, get in for 4, put them at 15 damage, the next couple of turns are really important for our opponent. Now, on this turn, they're going to get down Yoshin Frontliner and a Warden of the Inner Sky. They're going to spend just a little bit of time thinking about what the proper play here is, and then they're going to tap some dudes down to make this Warden of the Inner Sky just a little bit larger on the left side of your screen. They're going to take another extra second to realize whether or not they should attack with it, and then they're going to go ahead and do it. We're going to block with Infestation Sage and make sure we sack it to our Bartolome. That's going to give us triggers off of our LSO core. It's going to make Bard into a 5-power monster, and then we get to resolve Braids on our turn. So we're feeling pretty good about life. We get in with the 1/1 flyer that Infestation Sage left behind and the 5-power Bard. They block with Yoshin Frontliner, take a point of damage, and then we can sacrifice our insect token to Braids end of turn. They're not going to come down a creature, so they go to 10, and we end up getting a free card off of that. Not too bad. Now, on their turn, they finally get their third land on turn 4. And then decide they're going to Resolute Reinforcements. That is going to keep us from getting in on the ground with Bartolome for very likely the rest of the game. So good play. They also tap some dudes down to make Warden of the Inner Sky a little bit larger, and they get back their Yoshin Frontliner. So they come in on us, and they do it with 3 dudes. That's going to solve their case. We just take the right blocks here, kill a couple of their guys, but again, they don't care. They get to solve their case and get in 5 on us. We get a 15. Again, not so big of a deal. We still have Braids, LSO Core, and Bartolome. On our turn, we get down Greedy Freebooter, and we can get lost the 5/5, and we can resolve our second Bartolome, getting triggers off of LSO Core. We're going to end up putting them at 4 this turn, which looks really good for us, right? But flash forward just a couple of turns later, and you'll see what's happened here. They have stabilized at 1 thanks to 2 Knight Errant of Eos here and a couple of removal spells that were able to get rid of a couple of dudes. But all we have to do is draw Vengeful Blood Witch, sacrifice it to the Bartolome, and we can clean the game up like that. So give this deck a shot, man. It's a fun one to play, and it ain't that many rare wildcards if you're on the arena. As a matter of fact, it's 0 mythic wildcards, which is nice. But again, in paper, this thing is less than $50. A great deal for such a fun deck that'll teach you a lot about Magic if you're new to the game and feel like pure nostalgia if you're not new to the game. And extra bonus advantage to playing in paper, you don't have to click through all these triggers. If you just have a Bartolome sitting on the table on Arena, you have to click through every single phase, yours and your opponent's, no matter what happens. In real life Magic, you don't necessarily feel the need to do that, right? So that'll save you a lot of time. Paper's the way to go. But anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Just let me know how you felt about everything. It would really help me if you shared this one around. I spent a lot of time doing all that fun intro stuff. I'm trying to be Ristic Studies, if you can't tell. He's a good guy, but watch his content. He's a great Magic channel. But apart from that, I've got a Patreon. If you want to support the channel and make sure I can keep putting up silly content like this, that'd be good for me. I'd like to. It's only $1 a month, and you can vote on what content we do here on the channel. I'll leave a link in the description if you consider doing that. I would appreciate that a lot. Apart from that, like the video to put it in more recommended feeds, and subscribe to the channel if you want more content, not just like this, but all kinds of wacky stuff. We really do a lot over here. But anyway, that is, of course, Allski Kowalski and Itski Lewitsky. I am Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.